Hi, welcome back to Key Lime Academy. Today marks the first of many history lessons I hope to give you on this YouTube channel, and maybe one of the reasons why you're subscribed. So if you're one of my history junkies, this one's for you. So what are we talking about today? What are we going to learn? We are going to learn from my expert journalism and research skills about the history of pockets. Pockets, we know them, we love them. Why do they exist? And we're going to answer one of the questions that is old as time, as why do men get such big pockets? And as women, we get dainty little, teensy little things, if there's even pockets at all, if they're even functional at all. Let's dive into it. The current pants that I am wearing right now are a pair of men's trousers that I tailored to fit myself. So these pockets are deep. You want to see how deep my pockets go? Check out my pockets. Check out my butt pockets. Look at that. I got pockets for days. A rotary knife. A set of fabric scissors. A bottle of Topo Chico. A JBL Bluetooth speaker. That's what I can fit in my pockets. What about you? Let's now attempt to put the exact same items in this pair of women's Adidas sweatpants. Fabric scissors. Rotary cutter. JBL speaker. Bottle of Topo Chico. I'm a bit scared to move. Disclaimer, this YouTube video is based off pure research from the internet. I do not endorse any facts. I'm simply out here spreading the knowledge that I found on the internet. If you do not agree, please do not yell at me. I'm just a girl, so I'm just out here trying to make content for you to watch. I don't think I'm wrong about most of these things, but if I am wrong and you know that I am wrong, you can let me know, but please don't hurt me, okay? So we're starting this story off in the 1600s. What did we have? In the 1600s, we had bags. People had bags. People were bagged up, okay? So men were bagged up, women were bagged up, everybody had bags. Go get your bag, hun, you know? Everybody carried bags. So we're not exclusive to men or women. This didn't happen at this time, but bags were a sign of status because not everybody could afford to, even have clothes on their back. So bags were something that were a luxury. Not everybody had them, but those that did have them, put them to use. Because, at this time, you didn't really have garments that were capable of holding things. So your bag was all you had. But one thing that should be noted here is that handbags didn't exist. This was a time of trunk bags, traveler bag, weekender bags, satchels, slings, crossbody situations. This was a time where bags were purely there for functionality and not because they wanted the aesthetic of a bag. They needed a bag because they literally had nowhere to put their things. And, what else were you going to do? Leave it in the jungle? You got to have a bag. They weren't gender specific. They weren't occupation specific. The only thing that bags were different in was luxury. If you had a ton of money, you probably had a few bags. But if you didn't have a ton of money, you just had to figure things out. So they were bags. There were all kinds of bags. Most bags during this time looked a lot like this. As we move later into the century, late 1600s, early 1700s to mid 1700s, this is where we are introduced for the first time to something called tie-on pockets. They looked a lot like this. And tie-on pockets were something that were, again, not gender specific. Men were using tie-on pockets. Women were using tie-on pockets. And more often than not, these pockets were deep. Like you could fit your firstborn child in that pocket if you needed to. Those pockets were really deep. Something that is important to note here is the fashion of the time. So majority of the clothing that you see women wear around this time was not a good representation of what their natural bodies looked like. So you have to think about it. Nothing on their bodies was actually generated from the actual shape of their bodies. So everything was like a shape that was put into the garment. So you had underskirts, you had girdles, you had all of this extra stuff that made your body look away. So you had a lot of room to work with in terms of what you could tie on. So your pockets could be really deep, but you have 12 layers of crinoline, so nobody knows if you have 30 things in your pocket because it was so easy to hide what was inside of your gown because you had so much engineering that went into what you wore. So it was really easy to have pockets at this time. Again, they weren't sewn into the garments because a lot of the time those garments were made of very delicate fabrics that didn't have the structural integrity to hold the things that they needed to hold. But as we get later into the 17th century, you start seeing for the first time sewn in pockets for menswear. So this is the first time that you see like a clear kind of division in men versus women's pockets. So men kind of got them first because they had a lot of trousers at this time. So they had like this skinny little legging like trousers that you see all the time. So I think that that's one of the reasons why men kind of got introduced to pockets first because they were actually wearing trousers, whereas women at this time frame did not have trousers. That just didn't happen, you know? Disclaimer number 2. I'm trying really hard to give you the information. I don't want to force my opinion onto you, so I'm going to let you form your opinions yourself. I'm going to try to stay neutral and just what I know, okay? Here is an example of what those sewn in pocket first originates of the trousers for men looked like. As the 17th century started to end and as the 18th century started to begin, we are going to have some big changes that come around that kind of catapult the future of womanhood, of purses, handbags, pockets, and the differences between men and women's fashion when it comes to pockets. At the late 17th century, silhouettes for women began to change. So we went from having the like engineered version of a woman's body to now our clothes are getting a little bit tighter. We can see a little bit more of ourselves in our garments. And so it's really hard to hide those tie-on pockets like it was before. So a change has to occur here. And the change that occurs is the handbag. At the I'm telling you, like late, early 18th century, late 17th century is when the handbag is first born. Ah, handbag. This handbag looked like this. And it was not called a handbag. It was called a reticule. And it was not very large because you really start to see a division at this time of what a woman is allowed to do. It's a really important point in history where the money isn't really controlled by women. You don't really need to carry things of importance. When bags kind of first originated, when at the start of this video, we talked about how everybody had bags. Everybody needed to carry around their important items versus now the important items are not really in the women's hands. It's more of a man's job. And so we really don't need those deep pockets like we used to because we don't really get the option to need those. So we have the reticule, and this is kind of the spark of handbags. And I think that this is the very first moment that we kind of see the industry catapult. This is kind of the first time that bags are looked at as a feminine object and not a masculine object. Because before this period, anybody could carry a bag. There was no such thing as like a man purse. There was no such thing as a satchel for men. It was just, these are bags. These are what we have and they're practical and we're going to use them. But this was the first time that it was like, oh, this ridicule, this is a women's bag. As the 18th century starts to come to a close and the 19th century starts to come around, we see another big distinction and another big catapult into why we need handbags in the first place as women. And that is the birth of the cosmetic industry. So at this time, there is a huge push in marketing in the newspapers and whatever. You know, you got to have that lipstick and you got to have that blush and you've got to have this brush. And you also need to have a mini mirror in your purse. And how are we going to hold all those things in our pockets? And also, I don't know about you, but I do not want to carry a red lipstick in my garment that then is going to get all over my garment. It's just not safe. So, yeah, purses became a thing that we really did need at this time because we needed a place to put all of our stuff. And that is partially thanks to the cosmetic industry because that was a really big push. Because before this point, beauty enhancers were obviously a thing, but it wasn't pushed as in the capitalistic industry as much as it was other than in this period. At this time frame, cosmetics were a thing. You had to have blush, you had to have mascara, you had to have eyeliner, you had to have 5 shades of lipstick because you never know when you might need a red lip or a pink lip or a purple lip. You had to have it. Cosmetics were pushed so hard during this time. At this time, you do see fuller skirts kind of start to reemerge. So there is a slight kind of backtracking where tie-on pockets do get popular for a little bit, but that doesn't stick because in the early 19th century, you get the emergence of so many of our really big, rich design houses that we see today. Like you get Chanel, you get Hermes, other design houses, Versace's coming around. You start to see all of these really big names. And this is where things are really going to shift in terms of fashion, in terms of pockets, and in terms of handbags. So times are a-changing. As we get into the 19th century, it becomes wartime. So between 1914 and like 1930, we see World War I and we see World War II. Obviously, this is going to vastly change our clothing due to rations, due to the jobs that women have now. Because before, women weren't in the workplace. But as World War I and World War II come and go, women are having to take the jobs of the men that are having to go fight in the military. So fashion becomes very utilitarian and very functional. And so do our pockets. At this time, we get things like trousers, suffrage suits, and skirts. And guess what? We also get because of these things. You remember how I talked in the late 17th century where men started wearing a lot of trousers, and guess what? They got pockets. Well, women get to wear trousers now. So guess what? We get pockets. And not only did we get pockets, but we got large, useful, functional pockets. World War II officially ends in 1945. And so does the era of women in the workplace. Women get to go back home. And that changed a lot of things. So we almost see a sort of regression here when it comes to pockets. And not only pockets, but women's fashion seems to go backwards a little bit. Because at this time, the Dior New Look emerges in 1947. And the Dior New Look is a phenomenon that's talked about all the time during fashion history. And you get the two-piece suits. You get the really tight hourglass silhouettes. And you kind of veer away from the trousers and you start to see the two-piece sets. And it kind of really is almost a moment of, it's kind of truthfully the first time that we really see what the female silhouette is like. Because like we talked about in the beginning of this video, a lot of what was engineered when it came to intense fashion back in the 17th and 18th century was all falsely, that wasn't exactly what our bodies looked like. It was girdles built underneath your dresses that actually weren't even the silhouette of your body. And so this is kind of the first time that we start to see tighter silhouettes. We start to see curves. We start to see the curves of Marilyn Monroe. You know, we start to see all of these icons that are showing their bodies as what they are. But this does something for us. This promotes an issue because not only are our garments tight, but how are you going to put pockets in a garment that is skin tight? It's just not as feasible as it was whenever our garments were falsely engineered. So you run into a different issue now of your garment fits you tighter. So where are you going to put a pocket? And honestly, from this time forward, accessories become a really important thing. When you have the Dior New Look and you have design houses like Chanel that are coming out with these sets. So you have the suit set, you have the matching hat, and you have the matching purse. Accessories become really important, and how we look and present ourselves becomes really important to society as women. So this is another important shift where things really, really change. And from this point forward until our very, very modern 2000s society, that doesn't really shift. So up until this point, our silhouettes change, they're much tighter. And our pockets, it's kind of a question of do they even exist? Because not only in trousers are our pockets not deep, but if our pockets were deep, we wouldn't necessarily have a use for a handbag. So it's kind of a push and pull. Fast fashion emerging during the late 1900s and early 2000s, you run into the risk of these fast fashion companies don't want to pay the money to insert fabric into the garment. It's extra fabric, which is an extra cost. And that's something that they are just not going to do. So you run into an issue of quality. When things are mass produced, quality is going to go down. There's not going to be extra fabric inside your garments. So you kind of veer away from this handmade society that was very present in the all the way from the 20s, even late into the 70s. Everything was really handmade, and then fast fashion really puts a dent in that because then they are a little bit greedy and they care about how much fabric they're using. And they don't want to invest in extra design concepts because it doesn't benefit them. Other thing you run into that you kind of see during this time is it kind of puts a division even further in the workplace when it comes to men and women, because oftentimes, men can put their things in their pockets. However, women often have to carry a purse, and that gives like a clear distinction of who you are in a workplace. So it is a kind of push and pull as this era kind of continues on. But what's I think is really cool is when you get to the early 2000s, things really start to change because dynamics of fashion begin to change. We go from you have to dress as a woman, you have to dress as a man, to things starting to become unisex, and things are starting to become baggy. Things are starting to become so more diverse than they were centuries ago. And so it's really cool to see the evolution of that. And now men can wear women's clothing, women can wear men's clothing. So it really gives a clear, kind of opens the floor to what matters to us. And of course, you're always going to have those designers that omit pockets for design and aesthetic purposes, which is totally fair. As a designer, I can understand that. And you're always going to have the power as a consumer. And I think that's something that's really cool about pockets as a whole, is we have a really screamed from the rooftops about wanting pockets. And now I would say that a good 80%, maybe 70, most garments have some sort of pocket included in them. And that's because we've screamed, that we've told people what we want. And I think that's amazing as a consumer that we can have that impact and that we can choose to purchase from companies that do listen to us and put those design implements into practice. So, what do you think? Do you think that the size of pockets is a capitalism conspiracy theory? Do you think that the purpose that women have small pockets is because they want us to buy bags? Or are you kind of thinking that it's more so of a practicality thing and just kind of what we were given in terms of the cards that we held and what our silhouettes were throughout the time? So do you think it's on purpose? Do you think it's a conspiracy? Or do you think we just did what we had to do? And what do you think of the state of pockets today? Do you feel like we have a good comparison? Do you feel like we have good pockets? Let me know. Let me know if you like this video. Give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe. And let me know what you want to talk about next. What's something about fashion that you've always had questions about? Please comment. Let me know. This video is sponsored by Joanne Fabrics. Thanks, Joanne. I can say that because they're out of business, but actually this is not associated with Joanne's in any way. And please do not tell them that I said this because I don't want to get sued. And this has nothing to do with Joanne's.